One nation moved in silence. The global power structure shifted beneath everyone's feet, and the country that did it isn't the one American media wants you watching. While Washington focused every intelligence asset on the Middle East, while analysts tracked missile inventories and carrier deployments, a different kind of power play unfolded across three continents. The weapon wasn't steel, it was patience. And the architect wasn't operating from a war room. He was speaking from a university office in Tehran, shaping perceptions that move governments. This channel doesn't run on corporate money, doesn't answer to government pressure, and doesn't filter analysis through advertising concerns. If you want to understand how power actually shifts in the 21st century, not through invasions but through influence, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. What's happening right now is the kind of geopolitical earthquake that only becomes obvious years later when the damage is already done. Professor Mohammad Marandi isn't a general. He doesn't command troops or control weapon systems. But over the past 18 months, this single academic advisor to Iran's negotiating team has accomplished something the Pentagon spent $2 trillion trying to prevent. He helped reposition Iran from isolated pariah state to legitimate regional power broker. And he did it while most Americans had no idea who he was. Here's what happened. And here's why. The silence around it from Western media tells you everything about what they're not ready to admit. In March 2023, Saudi Arabia and Iran announced a China-brokered diplomatic restoration. Two nations that hadn't spoken in 7 years suddenly reopened embassies. The announcement came from Beijing, not Washington. That detail matters more than the headline suggested. The official narrative from Western capitals described it as a minor diplomatic development, a regional squabble being temporarily paused, nothing that changes the broader strategic picture in the Middle East. Standard analysis treated it as noise. The operational reality shows something completely different. Saudi Arabia is America's oldest and most critical Arab ally. For decades, Riyadh's foreign policy moved in lockstep with Washington's regional objectives. The Saudi-Iranian Cold War was a pillar of American strategy. Keep them divided. Keep them hostile. Keep them dependent on American security architecture. That dependency translated into weapons contracts, oil pricing cooperation, and regional influence. When Saudi Arabia went to Beijing instead of Washington to negotiate with Tehran, that pillar cracked. Not loudly, not with explosions or dramatic speeches. It cracked the way foundations crack, silently, structurally, and irreversibly. Professor Marandi was central to the Iranian negotiating posture that made this possible. As an advisor who speaks fluent English, understands Western media psychology, and operates as Iran's most effective international communicator, he spent years building the intellectual framework for this shift, not through military threats, through narrative preparation. Watch how he reframed Iran's position across hundreds of interviews and academic discussions. Never defensive, never apologetic, always presenting Iran as the rational actor responding to Western aggression rather than the aggressor requiring containment. Whether you agree with that framing or not is irrelevant. What matters is that it worked. It worked on audiences in the global south. It worked on Chinese strategic planners. And eventually it worked on Saudi decision makers who started asking a question Washington never wanted them to ask. What if containing Iran costs more than accommodating Iran? The math behind that question is brutal. Saudi Arabia spent 38 years treating Iran as an existential threat. The cost of that posture measured across multiple dimensions. Direct military spending, over $600 billion since 2015 alone. Proxy war expenditures in Yemen, $200 billion and counting, with no victory in sight. Economic opportunity costs from unstable regional environment, incalculable, but oil revenue certainty and foreign investment both suffered. Strategic dependence on the United States translated into weapons purchases at inflated prices, political concessions on oil production, and foreign policy constraints. Now compare that to the cost of the alternative. Diplomatic normalization with Iran, zero direct financial costs. Reduced proxy war spending, potential savings of $40 billion per year. Increased regional stability, opens economic opportunities across the Gulf. Strategic autonomy from Washington allows independent relationships with China, Russia, and the global south. Access to Iranian markets and energy cooperation. Potential value in the hundreds of billions. The Saudis did that math. Beijing helped them do it. And Professor Morandi's years of narrative work meant that when the moment came, Iran was positioned as a rational negotiating partner rather than an irrational threat. Read that again slowly. One academic's sustained communication strategy contributed to breaking a 38-year regional Cold War and shifting Saudi Arabia's strategic orientation away from automatic alignment with Washington. The weapon was words, the target was perception, and the impact will compound for decades. Here's what the Pentagon's public statements won't tell you. The Saudi-Iran rapprochement wasn't an isolated event. It was the visible symptom of a broader pattern that accelerated dramatically in 2023 and 2024. That pattern has a name: de-Americanization. Look at the sequence. March 2023, Saudi-Iran deal announced from Beijing. April 2023, Brazil and China announced bilateral trade in yuan, bypassing the dollar. June 2023, France completes first LNG transaction in yuan. August 2023, BRICS announces expansion, adding Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Argentina. September 2023, India and UAE begin oil trade in rupees. November 2023, Russia and Iran link banking systems, excluding SWIFT. January 2024, Saudi Arabia joins Shanghai Cooperation Organization as dialogue partner. February 2024, China brokers Yemen ceasefire talks, sidelining US and UN. March 2024, UAE announces it will accept UN for oil sales. Each event individually looks minor. Collectively, they represent a structural shift in how global power is organized, and Professor Marandi's fingerprints are all over the Iranian side of this realignment. He didn't cause all of it, but he was the voice explaining to international audiences why Iran's resistance to American pressure was sustainable, why Iran's relationships with China and Russia were strategic rather than desperate, and why betting against Iranian staying power was a miscalculation. Those arguments, delivered in calm, academic English across platforms from Press TV to YouTube to international conferences, gave legitimacy to the idea that Iran was on the right side of history's arc. Whether that's true or false doesn't matter for this analysis. What matters is that enough people in enough capital started believing it to change their behavior. That's influence. That's power. And it's the kind of power that doesn't show up on weapons inventory spreadsheets. Now let me show you the part that almost nobody is discussing openly, the dimension that makes this shift more dangerous than the immediate headlines suggest. The United States built its post-Cold War global position on a specific architecture: economic dominance through dollar supremacy, military dominance through uncontested force projection, alliance dominance through irreplaceable security guarantees. Each pillar reinforced the others. Countries needed dollars for oil. They needed American military protection for stability. They needed American-led alliances for international legitimacy. That architecture is cracking in real time. And Iran, guided partly by voices like Marandi's, figured out how to be the crowbar. Iran survived 45 years of American sanctions not by becoming stronger than America, but by becoming more patient. By building relationships with countries that also felt constrained by American dominance. By demonstrating that resistance to Washington doesn't automatically lead to collapse. And by waiting for the moment when American strategic overextension created opportunities, that moment arrived. Afghanistan withdrawal showed limits of American staying power. Ukraine showed limits of American weapons stockpiles. Taiwan tensions showed limits of American naval reach. Israel-Palestine crisis showed limits of American diplomatic credibility. And across all of it, Iran stayed standing. Bloodied, economically damaged, but standing. And Marandi was there at every international forum saying the same thing. We told you we would survive. We told you patience works. We told you the American century was ending. The Chinese listened. The Russians nodded. The Saudis started calculating. And the global South started asking questions about whether alignment with Washington was still the only viable path. Now pull back from the immediate crisis and look at what this means for the actual structure of international order. Because this isn't just about Iran. It's about whether American primacy can survive the demonstration that sustained resistance is possible. China is watching this extremely carefully. Beijing strategists see in Iran's experience a proof of concept for their own approach to American pressure. If Iran can survive maximum pressure campaigns, military threats, assassination programs, and comprehensive sanctions for 4 decades and emerge as a legitimate regional power broker, what does that say about China's chances in a sustained confrontation with Washington? The lesson Beijing is drawing: patience, strategic depth, alternative relationships, and narrative resilience matter more than immediate military parity. Iran never matched American military power. It didn't need to. It just needed to outlast American attention span and exploit American overextension. China has deeper resources, larger economy, more comprehensive partnerships. If Iran's model works, China's will work better. Russia is benefiting passively from every hour of American strategic attention consumed by Middle East dynamics. Moscow's calculation is straightforward. The more Washington focuses on containing Iran, the less bandwidth it has for Ukraine, for NATO expansion, for Asia-Pacific competition. Iran, intentionally or not, is providing strategic distraction that serves Russian interest, and voices like Marandi's that keep Iran in the conversation, that keep Western media covering Iranian developments, that keep the crisis present in American consciousness, they're valuable to Moscow even if Russia never coordinates with them. Every interview Marandi gives where he articulates Iranian grievances, explains Iranian strategy, and challenges Western narratives, he's contributing to a global conversation that shifts attention and resources toward the Middle East and away from other theaters. That's not conspiracy. That's just strategic reality in a world of limited attention and finite resources. The global South is drawing the most dangerous conclusion for American interests. Across Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, governments are watching one thing closely. Iran said no to American demands. Iran faced maximum consequences. Iran didn't collapse. Iran is now negotiating from a position of regional legitimacy. The message transmitting to governments across the developing world is not subtle. Defiance of Washington is not suicide. If you can survive the pressure, if you can build alternative relationships, if you can wait out American attention cycles, you can emerge with more sovereignty than you started with. That's an idea Washington spent 80 years trying to prevent from taking hold. The entire post-World War II American global system was built on the premise that resistance is futile, that economic integration with the West is the only path to prosperity, that military opposition to American interests leads to certain defeat. Iran's survival challenges every part of that premise. And communicators like Professor Marandi have been essential to broadcasting that challenge to audiences who might previously have accepted American inevitability. Here's the number that explains this better than any geopolitical theory. In 2003, when the United States invaded Iraq, 72% of countries in the UN voted with the United States on major resolutions more than half the time. In 2023, that number dropped to 47%. The shift accelerated after 2020. What happened? Countries started calculating that automatic alignment with Washington carried costs without guaranteed benefits. Iran's resistance, sustained over decades and articulated effectively by figures like Marandi, contributed to that calculation. Every country that watched Iran survive started asking, if they can resist, why can't we? If Chinese partnership works for Tehran, why not for us? If dollar dependence can be reduced, what's stopping us? The architecture of American global dominance was built on the belief that there is no alternative. Tina, there is no alternative. What Iran proved, and what Marandi helped communicate, is that Tina was always a psychological weapon more than an economic reality. There are alternatives, they're difficult, they're costly, but they exist. And once countries believe they exist, American leverage decreases. That's the shift. That's the silent earthquake. One country demonstrated that resistance is survivable. One academic helped explain why and how. And the global order started recalculating. Now here's where this goes next. And the time frame is shorter than most analysts want to admit. I'm making 3 specific predictions with clocks attached. First prediction, within 18 months, Saudi Arabia and Iran will announce a joint economic development project worth over $50 billion. Energy cooperation, infrastructure development, or cross-border industrial zones. The announcement will come with Chinese financing backing it. This will finalize what the March 2023 diplomatic deal started, full economic integration that makes the relationship irreversible. Second prediction, within 2 years, at least 3 major oil-producing nations will officially announce they accept yuan for crude sales. Not just experiments, not just partial arrangements. Full official policy. Saudi Arabia will be one of them. This will mark the point where dollar supremacy in energy markets becomes negotiable rather than assumed. Third prediction, within 36 months, the United States will face a choice in the Middle East it hasn't faced since 1979. Accept a region where American military presence is tolerated but not determinative, where American diplomatic influence is one voice among several, and where American economic leverage is constrained by alternative partnerships. Or attempt to reimpose primacy through direct military confrontation with Iran. The cost of that confrontation, both financially and strategically, will be higher than any Middle East war America has fought, and voices like Marandi's will have spent years preparing international opinion to view such a confrontation as American aggression rather than necessary enforcement. The second option leads to a conflict that breaks the American military in the same way Afghanistan and Iraq didn't quite manage, because this time, Iran wouldn't be fighting alone. It would have tacit Chinese economic support, Russian weapons cooperation, and regional partners who've already decided that their futures don't require automatic American alignment. Drop your prediction in the comments. Which happens first, the Saudi-Iran megaproject, the official UN for oil announcements, or the American choice point? Tell me, because I read every single one, and these predictions will age in real time. Here's what burned into the international system over the past 18 months. It's not infrastructure. It's not military bases. It's the belief that American global dominance is permanent and unchallengeable. One country stayed standing when everyone said it would fall. One academic helped explain why that mattered. And the entire global South started asking the question Washington never wanted asked. What happens if we stop automatically saying yes? If this gave you a framework for understanding power shifts that mainstream coverage missed, the role of narrative, the importance of patience, the way influence compounds slowly until it reaches critical mass, share it with one person who needs to understand that wars aren't just fought with weapons anymore. The most important battles are for perception, legitimacy, and strategic patience. And those battles are already underway. The next video goes somewhere even darker. It looks at the specific mechanisms China is using to lock in the new order while American attention is elsewhere. Subscribe so you're there when that analysis drops. Because what's coming will make the shifts we covered today look like the opening act.